I watch the hockey game, right? So I'm not going to boo, but there is a slide in here which you're going to really want to, break their rules and take a picture of, because I have a "Oh My God, Canada," which is as close to the national anthem as I'm going to get tonight. But my job here is just back cleanup. I mean, I listen to everybody else. You've had some amazing opportunities to get your, aperture opened up, see some things that you haven't seen before. And my job is to not be nice. That's partially because, I come from the land down under, so there is that whole 51st state thing that we're talking about. And I feel like we're a little bit more at home in Alberta, because we at least say, let's, get a free trade zone between the two of us or something like that. So, now, but I do have to say I'm not going to be nice. Now, everybody up here has been super cool, and it's like, well, we don't really know why, and we don't know. That's bullshit. And I grew up hand milking cows on a farm in Pennsylvania, and one of the things you learn when you're milking cows by hand is which end shit comes out of. And that's shit. So let's call it what it is. This was a mass planned genocide. You cannot accidentally kill people. And I can assure you that the cabinet and the premier of this province are actively involved in reckless homicide today. So stop kissing people's ass. If any injection goes into any arm from this moment forward, you are on notice. And it goes from reckless homicide to premeditated murder after I get done with my speech. That's what it is. So stop pretending it isn't. And I'm tired of this soft pedaling where we're supposed to be nice to genocidal, homicidal maniacs. It's time that we stop pretending and start calling them out. Okay, so I get it. We want political sensitivity. But you know what you can't have? You can't have what happened at the end of the Nuremberg trials. At the end of the Nuremberg trials, we decided that about 20 bad guys needed to go on trial. We killed most of them. Some went to jail. A couple of them died in the process. But what we never did was we never talked about the doctors who actually did the actual studies on human subjects in the camps. We didn't talk about the pharmacists and the chemical companies that did all of the chemistry that went into killing people. We didn't do any of that because we decided, because it was fashionable to decide, that we're going to hold a couple people accountable and everybody else just says sorry. See, I said it the right way, Canada. Sorry. Well, kiss my sorry ass. You cannot do that. Every single pharmacy, every single public health officer, by 2018, had the ability, if they are literate, to know that absolutely everything in this injection was lethal. Every single component was known and published to be lethal in 2018. For those of you not familiar with a conventional calendar, that's 2 years before all this nonsense happened. So anybody who tells me we were doing our best to follow the science is lying. And I'm not interested in having a civil conversation with lying, genocidal, homicidal maniacs. I'm interested in pointing out the facts. And I'm going to do that really fast. Now, von Hayek is very famous for this quote, and I love this. And by the way, seriously, if you want to take a picture of the slide, these are all yours. You can take a picture of it now, you can take a picture of it later, it doesn't matter. But the great news is we need to understand that this principle, which von Hayek talked about in Austria, is in fact a principle that we have to keep in mind all the time. And the problem, if you read the rest of his essay, is not only do we like to use emergencies to instill a permanent alteration in things, but the problem is we don't go back to the pre-emergency condition. We never go back to the pre-emergency condition. And that's unacceptable, because this is a way to manipulate a public into accepting a thing it would not otherwise accept. And we know that because they've said it. Right? Now we have CEOs of pharmaceutical companies that said, if we told people it was a gene therapy, they would have never taken it. Okay, newsflash. They did tell you it was a gene therapy. Every single one of the manufacturers did. The FDA's official document on mRNA said it was an experimental gene therapy. And they said that if we don't call it a vaccination, people won't take it. But it turns out that deceptive medical practices is illegal on both sides of the Canadian-U.S. border. And not a single person has decided to file those charges. Not one. And that's a simple one. That's low-hanging fruit. Now, I am obligated because I actually have what's called a moral compass. I know that's a very rare thing these days. But I'm obligated every time I get on stage to point this out. This is actually a quote published March 2015 from a statement that was made in 2014 by the co-conspirators who brought us the COVID-19 scam. And I want to read it. To sustain the funding base. Let's start with that sentence. Does that sound like public health to you? Let's keep reading because it gets better. Beyond the crisis, we need to increase the public understanding of the need for medical countermeasures such as a pan-influenza or pan-coronavirus vaccine. Remember the date on this? It was stated in 2014, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in March of 2015. Anybody familiar with how long before COVID that was? And by the way, during that period of time, the World Health Organization had said that SARS-CoV was already are you ready for this? An eradicated disease. So why would we need a vaccine for an eradicated disease, declared such by the World Health Organization? Oh, that's right, because it never was a disease. SARS 1.0 wasn't either. SARS 1.0 was the first round of the bioweapon release, and SARS 2.0 was the second round. And newsflash, we get to the real interesting piece. And by the way, is there like media in this room? Awesome. So let's go ahead and do this, because here's your indictment. And you sucker punched into this, and then you're not smart enough to do the simple research to go, hey, newsflash, maybe we should have read the operating plan, which says a key driver is the media and the economics will follow the hype. Did you hear that one? That sounds like public health through and through. The economics will follow the hype. I don't know. I didn't get a journalism degree. But hype doesn't feel like following the science, does it? People, listen, we've been duped. But part of the problem is you all have actually sat there and gone, well, that sounds like a bad thing. Clearly, there must have been a good motivation for it. No, there wasn't, because let's finish the sentence. We need to use the hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. Wow. Wow. You think that investors will respond is a statement that says the Alberta government and AHS were trying to do their best. Bullshit. Not a single one of them told you the truth. And it's not kind of a lie. This was actually domestic terrorism for the purpose of reckless homicide leading to now premeditated murder. That's what it was. So stop pretending it isn't. Now, people get upset when I do this because I like to show people the inconvenient things called facts. And by the way, the reason why I continue to move around the globe largely unimpeded is because I say things that if they weren't true, I'd be sued for libel. Because I say nasty things about bad people. We were just told we're not supposed to really judge. Well, guess what? I'm not judging. I'm not judging. I'm just pointing out, I don't know, the self-evident facts, like April of 2001, April 20th of 2001, when the CDC decided to file the patent on the human coronavirus isolated from humans. Isn't it fascinating that only 2 days later, in 2001, there was a vaccine for the thing that had been invented 2 days earlier? Now, I don't know if you're familiar with science, but that feels kind of back to the future-ish. That's like a Doc Brown moment to what? Go into the future to get data on the thing that had been discovered 2 days earlier and filed in, oh, that's right, a paper patent in the patent office, which could have not been disclosed for 18 months. So somehow mysteriously, a thing that had not been invented already had a vaccine for the thing that had been discovered 2 days earlier, with data in the patent on the vaccine for a thing that had happened 2 days earlier, according to the official record. Ladies and gentlemen, that actually doesn't really happen in the world unless criminals are colluding. That's the CDC. And that's a little company called Sequoia Pharmaceuticals. Now, you're all familiar with this image because I've used it before. But what I wanted to show you is, for those of you not familiar with it, this nonsense started in 1965. And that means that for those of you who are not paying attention, 12 years after the model of DNA was isolated, right? So this 1953 is when DNA started being recognized. So only 12 years later, the first thing that we found that we could turn into a biological weapon was coronavirus. Did you know that? That was the first thing we discovered. And it turns out that across the next 2 years, the United States and the United Kingdom decided to send infected tissue between the U.S. and the U.K. to see if we could infect healthy volunteers. I don't know how you guys do volunteers up here, but I don't know that I would necessarily sign up if I had informed consent that says, yeah, go ahead and shove that thing up my nose because I want to test a thing to see if it causes a thing. That's a stupid proposition. But by 1966 and 1967, we actually established that coronavirus was the best viral model to use as a vector to get people infected with other things. That's kind of an interesting problem when you realize that in 2000, Pfizer filed its first vaccine patent on the spike protein. Doesn't that sound like warp speed? Now, I'm familiar. We're up in Calgary and we're in Alberta, so I know that you guys know what maple syrup is up here. This warp speed was running as fast as maple syrup doesn't run in, say, February in the tundra. The spike protein vaccine that Pfizer filed was in 2000. 2000. Oops. That doesn't sound like warp speed, does it? And the reason why you don't know about this particular patent or the research associated with it is everything that it was injected into died. Oops. Now, the reason why you don't know about this is conveniently, we decided that we weren't going to play with that until we got to April of 2002. And in April of 2002, Ralph Barrick and his team of minions at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, patented what I'm now quoting from their patent was the infectious replication defective clone of coronavirus. That meant that we're going to take the coronavirus model, we were going to turn it into an envelope, we're going to put other things into that envelope, and we're going to deliver that into the cells so that it can infect people. But this is actually the admission that it's a bullet. It's a bullet. It's meant to hit a target, but unlike virus models that had been advanced before, this one wasn't supposed to propagate. And lo and behold, that patent filed in 2002 became SARS 1.0. Do you all know that? That was the patent on SARS 1.0. And the reason why I know it was because when we had SARS 1.0, we were told that this was going to be a pandemic that was going to ravage the earth, and guess what happened? About 800 people got sick and died. And probably, like in COVID, most of them were dying anyhow. But what we do know is that the weapon didn't go off the way it was supposed to, and there was a lot of people that were upset about that, so they decided that they needed to up the ante. Not surprisingly, we actually had the gain-of-function research that was approved the next year in 2003, so that the CDC and Sequoia Pharmaceuticals could actually figure that out. Now, my first briefing on all this nonsense happened in 2002. So when people say I'm somehow a COVID specialist, I'm not. I've been doing bioweapons inspections for the United States government since the 1980s and 1990s. So the bad news is I've been around this game a long time. I know how the game is played. We make a weapon, we deploy a weapon, and then we tell people that they need to come to us to rescue themselves from the weapon that we just deployed. And that's the game plan. That's what happened here. But there's a very interesting thing that happened when, in 2005, this is the part that everybody gets upset about, and I'm going to go ahead and speak directly to your provincial government here, when they actually pretend like this is just a pandemic and they were doing their best. The architect of this called this biowarfare enabling technology in 2005. Now, Canada has laws against biological warfare. Did you know that? Really robust laws. You actually adopted the post-Nuremberg laws that actually suggested that it's a bad idea to have biological weapons. Now, mind you, Canada hasn't paid attention to following or honoring that law, but you at least have the law. We don't have it. Because despite the fact that the United States prosecuted the Nuremberg trials, we did not adopt the Nuremberg Code, which everybody in the U.S. seems to forget. Like, we didn't do it. We came up with the rule, and then we decided, not for us. I know it's terribly American to do that, come up with a rule for everybody else, and it doesn't apply to America because we just know better. But the problem I want to show you on this particular slide is the fact that the lie that you were told about safe and effective was known to be a lie in 2010. In 2010, when the National Science Foundation grant, which was called Darwinian Chemical Systems, did you hear that? Let me just repeat it. Darwinian Chemical Systems. Anybody feeling good about that? That's a warm and fuzzy kind of Christmas feeling for you? When that grant showed that it was possible to take mRNA and transfect and translate it into human DNA and other cell lines, that's when Moderna, the company, was born. Moderna is the outgrowth of that grant. The first patent is the co-investigator on the National Science Foundation grant and the lead investor of Flagship Biosciences, which was the investment bank firm that actually put the check in to create Moderna. Interestingly enough, no real history on that. And that's going to ring a little tiny bell when we come back to sometimes funding happens and nobody really knows where the money came from. University of British Columbia. Not that I'm mentioning a Canadian interest, University of British Columbia. Which leads us to the decade of the vaccines in 2011, which is when the Gates Foundation, National Institutes of Health, NIAID, the Wellcome Trust, all of the Chinese CDC, all of the US CDC, and a lot of our allies got together and said, in 2011, by September of 2020, the universal vaccine will be accepted globally. That was in 2011 in a publication called The Decade of Vaccines, published by the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board of the World Health Organization. Now, I don't know how you are with forecasting up here in Calgary, but if you can forecast that the world is going to accept a universal vaccine by 2020 and 2011, that's a 9 years hence kind of projection. There's a high probability that you have a plan to do that. Well, they did have a plan. And that plan was published again inside of what was called the World at Risk publication. It was published on September 18th, 2019, in which the following was stated. A rapidly spreading pandemic due to a lethal respiratory pathogen, whether naturally emergent or accidentally or deliberately released. That was published September 18th, 2019. There are two words in that sentence that are highly problematic to all the BS that we hear about at conferences like this. The term lethal before respiratory pathogen, that's a problem, because that means we knew it was deadly. And then the word released. You know what you don't hear about in any of the, how did it get into circulation? Was it a lab leak? Was it the Wuhan wet market? Was it a bat and a pangolin that went into a bar and got on a bender one night after a hockey game? What was it? Oh, that's right. Accidental or intentional release. That's an act, ladies and gentlemen. That is not an accident. That is an act. And what was the metric? By September 2020, the world would accept a universal vaccine. Stop pretending not to know. It's insulting to your intelligence and to everyone's intelligence. Stop pretending not to know. They knew they were going to kill people for the purpose of instilling terror. They knew that the intervention that they were going to do was going to kill people. And by September of 2018, oh my God, Canada, I promised you the slide. That is the legal proceedings of the University of British Columbia's fight with Moderna on who owned lipid nanoparticles. Oh, that's right, decided in the Patent Trial Appeals Board in November of 2018. Did you hear the date on that? Now, coincident with this mysterious lawsuit where Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna were fighting with the University of British Columbia's various corporations, and holy cow, if you look at the history of those corporations, it reads literally like a bloodbath. Like, oh, that's right, some of the investors in these corporations died in a plane crash that might have taken out a former premier. Did I say that out loud in Canada? I'm not supposed to say that, because that would suggest that somebody was trying to kill the evidence. Except they were, and that's why that happened. And we're sitting here pretending like, oops, we don't know anything about that. Just look the other way. Well, here's a tiny little problem. Don't look the other way. When you have to murder people to cover up an international crime, we should be concerned about that. We should be equally concerned about the fact that here in Canada, we enabled the largest genocide in human history, courtesy of University of British Columbia. The largest genocide in human history, enabled right here in Canada. That sucks. Yeah, a lot of people are sorry. And I like that we're at least saying sorry the way we should say sorry. Because I get sorry about that. That's a twofer right there. From a yank, that's pretty good. Sorry about that. But nobody bothers to look at this, and nobody bothers to look at the dates on this thing, and nobody bothers to look at the communications around the dates on this and go, hold on a second, why was Arbutus and Acuitas and all these other companies, why were they so freaking interested in mRNA vaccines when, oh, that's right, nobody was manufacturing them? Why would you have a patent fight, a very costly patent fight? Why would you do that if there was no commercial interest in the thing that you were fighting about? Unless there was a commercial interest in the thing you were fighting about, in which case you would be fighting about that thing. And it turns out I made these allegations. I've been told I'm very anti-Canadian, and I'm probably, just an American with an axe to grind? No. The crime could only have happened if UBC was allowed with impunity to enable biological warfare-enabling technologies. And that is a violation of Canadian law. And you know what I've not seen a single Canadian do? Even allege what I just said. Even allege it. Not a single Canadian. Why is a bow tie wearing Virginian from the United States the only one that has the, I don't know which part of the anatomy you need, but I'll go ahead and let you fill in whatever piece of anatomy you think. Why is it that a bow tie wearing Virginian is the only one that seems to point out Canadian law, which says that if you enable the production and distribution of biological weapon, you are guilty of penalties that include years in prison, hundreds of millions of dollars of fines, and I understand it's Canadian dollars, and those suck, so let's call it half of hundreds of millions of dollars of crimes, until Alberta becomes the state, and then we have dollars, and then that's all good. And then Canada participates in my favorite thing, which is this little thing, which was the EHCR, the European Convention on Human Rights, and the modification of a little thing that the World Health Organization did in 2018, which was really cool. What they did was they decided to change the definition of an adverse event following vaccination so that it could only be an adverse event if there was published literature proving that the event was an adverse event based on the vaccination. Isn't that really clever? You're going to roll out a thing that's never been used. You're not even going to have it be a vaccination. You're going to have it be a genetically modified product that is supposed to genetically modify an organism. We don't have any data on it. We don't have any safety, efficacy, anything else data. We don't have any data on the thing, but we're going to go ahead and roll it out. And it cannot, by law, have an adverse event because we changed the law on what an adverse event is. Which means everybody can die from this thing, and every public health agency around the world can get up and say there were no adverse events. You know why? Because they changed the legal definition of what an adverse event was. They erased the evidence before there was evidence. Convenient when you can do that, under the cloak of darkness. Can't get off the stage without pointing out that the Commonwealth is all over this. Eliza Manningham-Buehler, and this is where you know that I must be absolutely mad, head of the Secret Service, MI5, was the architect of this thing. Yes, I said it. There you go. She was the head of the Wellcome Trust at the time this happened, along with Jeremy Farr. Did you know that? This was a UK intel op. You're not supposed to say that in Commonwealth countries. You're actually not supposed to say that in any country because they get pissed when you say it. But the problem is, that's who it was. Julia Gillard, that wonderful prime minister from Australia who was so rock solid when she was prime minister. Woohoo! Also leading the mass genocide. Jeremy Farr, Dame Amelia Fawcett at State Street, and none other than our lovely friend that we like to point out all the time, Dustin Moskowitz, the co-founder of Facebook, who funded all of this so he could get CRISPR technology approved under an emergency use authorization. That's right, gene editing needed to have something to edit. And we know from Dolly the sheep and every other experiment that we did, we know that the public wouldn't accept it. So what we're going to do is we're going to defile every child, every newborn, every mother, every gestating mother. We're going to defile all of them so we can do what? Build the inventory of people who need gene editing in the future. Oh, shit. Did he say that out loud? Yes, he did. See, people, this was about profit at the cost of human life. This was genocide for hire. That's what it was. And until we embrace that that's the reality we're dealing with, we're fooling ourselves. I'm going to end with this slide. Do we need Nuremberg 2.0? The answer is we don't, because Nuremberg was wrong. We need something more akin to what South Africa did at the end of apartheid. We need truth and reconciliation. But for that to work, you have to have three elements. First of all, you have to have absolute disclosure of the truth. And until anyone, by the way, has the courage to stand on a stage, me, naked on a stage for that matter, so nobody can have a bug in my ear or anything else. I'll sit naked on a stool. And the other side with all of their computers, all their information, whatever they want. If they can take down a single one of my facts, I'll shut up. But here's the problem. They can't. There was a several hundred thousand, went up to, I think, $1 million challenge after Plandemic came out for anybody to go on stage with me and debate a single fact that I said. Nobody would take it. So here's the bad news. Nuremberg's not what we need. We need truth, and we need to have the email communication between the people that did all this. That needs to be unredacted, and it needs to be in public. Number one. Number two, we have to have contrition. Because this is not a say you're sorry. This is contrition. This is actually the remediation that says we are stopping gain-of-function research. We are going to UBC, and we're going to look at the money that was laundered through UBC to enable biowarfare, and we're going to actually out every single person involved in that. And that's the kind of thing that we have to do. We have to do the same thing at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. We need to do that everywhere we can go, because every person involved in this needs to actually have a contrite response to this, not a I was doing my job at the time. Because the job at the time was known by 2018 to be premeditated murder. That is not a job you can ever hide behind. And you never will be able to hide behind, so don't pretend. So it's truth, it's contrition, and then under Crown law you have something that's very unique. We don't have it in the United States, but you do have it here in Commonwealth. You have the ability, under fraudulent inducement, to have the aggrieved party be recovered to their pre-aggrieved state. Hear what I said? That means every small business that was closed. That means every person who was injured. That means every person who had a loss of life, loss of employment, loss of anything else, has to be returned to the condition they were before the violation happened. Did you hear what I just said? Before the violation happened. You know what that means? That means Pfizer and Moderna have a legal obligation to find out how to fix the shit that they put into people's bodies. That's their legal obligation under Commonwealth law. And until we've done that, we have not even come close to justice. Ladies and gentlemen, I love the fact that 5 years into this thing, and now 23 years into fighting for humanity, I have never had to retract a single word I've said. Not once. Because you have not heard my opinion. Every single one of these things is a referenced fact. You can look them up. And the reason why what's happening here tonight is so critical is it is time for the cabinet of Alberta to, for the first time on the planet, have a group of elected officials stand together and stand for the first time for humanity. And just between us chickens, that was worth me flying up to Alberta and hanging out in Calgary to let you know that if you ever have anybody in that community that is going to have the courage to stand up, you've got one bald bow tie wearing penguin upside down. Yes, if you look closely, the penguins are upside down because that's how you show that you're in distress. That was, by the way, for the environmental movement. I wanted to make sure that they knew I cared about penguins. I have a maple leaf tie, but it's not red and white, so I didn't wear it. The point is, you have an ally. And you have an army of allies, because the fact of the matter is, we, the people, can stand together. And it's time that we all do. Thank you very much, and have a good night.